Hi everyone, this is your host John and I welcome you back to another episode of the Subcontinent. Our program focuses on the South Asian region and aims to critically analyze important and controversial issues, particularly of the subcontinent. This region hosts almost 25% of the global population. And with the help from our team and experts, we will try to discuss, dissect, explain and analyze issues which affect the people living in this diverse melting pot. Please stay with us.
In this edition of the Subcontinent, we will explore the influences of the Iranian Revolution on the countries across the subcontinent. And we will discuss how the Islamic Revolution created a new model for an Islamic civilization that has been inspiring Muslims ever since.
Every year around these days, Iranians warm the heart of the winter with celebrations to mark the anniversary of their 1979 revolution. The revolution is much celebrated across the subcontinent, and it is a ray of hope for all the people living in oppression across the world. The Islamic Revolution was a long chain of events which culminated in the overthrow of the Shah of Iran and the establishment of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Shah was a ruthless dictator who persecuted millions of Iranian people, and the revolution was a momentous event in the modern history of Asia and Islam. The revolution had enormous social and political impacts across the subcontinent and all around the world.
The mindset and social structure that led to the Islamic Revolution of Iran triggered a process of geopolitical realignment whose influences remain to this day. The ideology that was born out of the events of 1979 has since been a uniting beacon of hope for the oppressed people of the world in general and the Muslim population in particular. The people of the subcontinent are no stranger to rebellion either. There are clear similarities between the Iranian social uprising against the despotic Pahlavi regime and the endeavors that ended the British colonialist rule over the subcontinent and created modern India and Pakistan. Both the nationalistic revolutionary movements of the people of Iran and the subcontinent started with the ultimate aim of terminating the control of imperialist pawns and marked a sea change in politics and attitudes of world powers towards Asia.
देखिए अगर हम आजकल के दौर में जितना ये दौर आगे जा रहा है और जितनी बुराइयां और जितने ये मुसलमानों पे ये काबिज हो रहे हैं हालात मतलब जैसे हो रहे हैं उसके मुताबिक अगर कोई मुस्लिम कंट्रीज़ में अगर खड़ा है the one country who is standing for his rights, for the Muslims' rights, for the humans' rights, we can't say simply हम अलहदा नहीं कह सकते कि ईरान अपने लिए खड़ा है या सिर्फ मुसलमान के लिए ये वाहिद ईरान मुल्क है जो इंसानियत के लिए आवाज़ देता है हम पाकिस्तान अपने परसेप्शन रखते हैं पाकिस्तानीज़ कि ईरान टोटली यूरोप की साइड पे है नहीं ईरान पाकिस्तान और तमाम मुसलमान ममालिक के लिए ये एक मिलकर एक प्लेटफार्म बनाना चाहता है इसके अलावा इस आज अगर यूएस इन सहयूनी क़ुव्वतों को कोई ललकार रहा है तो वो वाहिद ईरान है सऊदी अरब ये सारे ममालिक हमारे भाई हैं मुसलमान भाई हैं नो डाउट मगर उनके हुक्मरान जैसे वो स्ट्रेटजीज़ फॉलो कर रहे हैं ईरान वैसे नहीं कर रहा ईरान इंशाल्लाह एक उभरता हुआ स्टेट है इंशाल्लाह हमारी उम्मीद है अभी आहिस्ता आहिस्ता चीज़ें बहुत क्लियर हो रही हैं और रही इनकलाब की तो हम दुनिया में अमल देखते हैं या प्रैक्टिकल देखते हैं अगर प्रैक्टिकली हमने देखना है तो इनकलाब ईरान का ही नंबर 1 है इस्लामी इनकलाब ईरान नंबर 1 जा रहा है हर लिहाज से
The Iranian Revolution and the establishment of an Islamic government was a huge win for all Muslims and Islamic movements in the subcontinent. After the revolution and throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Islamic political parties and movements kept popping up in almost all Muslim countries because the Iranian Revolution was a proof that a non-secular Islamic model was not just a dream, it was a reality.
The ties between Iran and the subcontinent go far back for several millennia, but there is an uncanny connection in their recent history that helped revive the Islamic civilization through a new non-secular model for society. The British colonization of India in 1858 precipitated the collapse of the classic Islamic civilization, and by early 20th century, almost the entire Muslim world was colonized by expansionist oil-hungry European powers. The Ottoman Empire, the last representative of the classic Islamic civilization, collapsed after World War I in 1918. Therefore, the first half of 20th century saw many Muslim nations fight to regain their independence. Iran's success in creating a model for government rejuvenated hope for all those who had been trying to form a society ruled by the true Islamic teachings. The Islamic Revolution brought about the resurgence of political Islam throughout the Muslim world.
इनकलाबी इस्लामी से पहले तो जो मतलब इस्लाम जारी था वो तकरीबन रसूमात की हद तक था। तो जब इनकलाबी इस्लामी आया और इसने जो दीन का सही चेहरा है और रसूमात से हट के तो वो लोगों के सामने आश्कार कर दिया। और अभी अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह पाकिस्तान में भी इसके दूररस नताइज सामने आ रहे हैं, क्योंकि बहुत सारे उलमा, जवान, तंजीमें वगैरह इसी पे ही काम कर रहे हैं। क्योंकि अभी तक जो हम रस्मी तौर पर चल रहे थे और दीन के मुताबिक, मतलब हमने अपनी मर्ज़ी से एक दीन बनाया हुआ था ना, रस्मी दीन। तो अभी जो है अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह जो दीन की असल शनाख्त है वो काफ़ी हद तक बेहतर हो गई है अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह।
It proved that it was possible to take on the West, revolt against their collaborating monarchs and defeat dictators.
ये हमारे लिए एक दर्स है जी, तो हमें उसको फॉलो करना चाहिए, तो इसी में हमारी कामयाबी हो सकती है। तो जिस तरह बीइंग वो एक नेशन बनी है तो हमें भी चाहिए कि हम एक कौम बने। असरात तो आप अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह देख लें पूरी दुनिया में है कि जो दुनिया पूरी डरती है सुपर पावर से, वो इस वक्त इनकलाब इस्लाम से डरती है। तो बस ये बहुत बड़ी अचीवमेंट है।
The Islamic Revolution of Iran, led by Imam Khomeini, was a global and epochal event with historic significance. Its cause and message of awakening and resistance has been resonating with Muslims and non-Muslims who are oppressed by corrupt authorities even decades later. Apart from the anti-imperialistic spirit that is rooted in the Iranian Revolution and popular uprisings in the subcontinent, Pakistan and Afghanistan felt the impacts of the revolution even more because of their close proximity to the epicenter of the revolution.
The Iranian Revolution was inspirational for the world as a promise of freedom, while it heightened waves of Islamic awakening and anti-imperialist views in several countries of the region, including Pakistan and Afghanistan.
सन 1979 में इनकलाब इस्लामी ईरान के आने के बाद यकीनन जैसे पूरी दुनिया पे असरात हुए हैं, इसी तरह ममलिकत पाकिस्तान पे भी असरात हुए हैं।
ईरानी इनकलाब का बहुत ज़्यादा असर है। हम मोमिनीन के दिलों पे तो उसका है ही असर। हमारे अहले सुन्नत बरादरान भी अभी ये मानने पे आ गए हैं कि वाकई ईरान ही एक मुल्क है, ये ही एक इनकलाब था जो वाकई अमल से लाया गया था।
In Pakistan, the news of their neighbor's revolution was hailed as a victory for Islam, and the press was largely favorable towards the new government. Back then, General Zia-ul-Haq described Imam Khomeini as a symbol of Islamic insurgents.
The impact in the last 40 years, and certainly at the advent of the Islamic Revolution, was, as I said, huge, incredible. It made a lot of sort of changes. And I think because of the impact that the revolution had on the subcontinent, the Muslim community has given many shuhada in Pakistan, particularly, especially if you think of Shaheed Arif Hussain Husseini, who was regarded as, dubbed as Khomeini of Pakistan. He was martyred in 1988.
According to analysts, Imam Khomeini's influence and esteem in Pakistan was greater than the country's longest-serving head of state.
I was lucky and privileged to have visited Iran first time after the revolution in 1981. I spent about 3 weeks in Iran. We went from Tehran to Khorramshahr to Desful to Abadan to the war front at that time. So that was an incredibly awakening experience for someone who was a young person at that time, not like an old man at this moment. And I was very fortunate to attend Imam Khomeini's funeral as well. So I had two sort of experiences of this incredible man who has left a great legacy for mankind. Not just for an individual like me, but for really everyone. And to sort of understand Imam Khomeini correctly is really that Imam Khomeini in his book, Ethics and Politics, nails this issue eloquently in this manner. And he says, being a Muslim is not only restricted to individual acts of worship and devotion. It transcends these and embraces all levels of social life. From this perspective, being a Muslim means acceptance of responsibility and having an active presence in society. That, I think, in a nutshell, puts the purpose, what Imam Khomeini stood for and what the Islamic Revolution in Iran is trying to pursue for the last 42 years.
In addition to profound spiritual and historical connection to Iran, people in Afghanistan used many of Iranians' tactics in their own demonstrations and fight for freedom, such as hand-copying flyers or pamphlets and spread them around the city at nights. When the Soviet forces landed in Kabul late in 1979, Iran's revolutionary forces were among the first to condemn the move. They sent a letter to the Soviet embassy in Tehran and urged the withdrawal of the foreign forces.
Iran's revolution was a wake-up call for those who saw themselves as the lords of the world. They felt entitled to install or remove rulers, assist in assassinations and coups d'etats, and change dynasties and subjugate the public. The Islamic Revolution stopped all that in Iran. The initial aim of the revolutionaries was ousting the Pahlavi monarchy and liberating the Iranians from the evils of Western imperialism. But it did so much more. It transformed the politics of the region and its relation with the West forever.
Some Westerners believe that the complex network of aligning and conflicting forces of the world today is the product of the Cold War and its generally satisfactory conclusion to the advantage of the Western alliance in 1989. But this seems like a narrow-minded first world perspective, as the real paradigm was being shaped about a decade earlier, when the Islamic Revolution added religion to the history. The dynamics and optics of the Cold War rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union was severely upset by the Islamic Revolution in Iran. Not only Americans had lost a key strategic ally against the Soviets, but also they had gained a new strong enemy with far-reaching influence, especially throughout the Muslim world. The emergence of the Islamic Iran meant new sets of policies and new kinds of politicians. This drastically shook US assumptions and its imperialistic approach towards the East.
Iran has come out with flying colors. Of course, there are challenges, there are things that are happening which are very difficult for the ordinary people in Iran, but I think it has become a symbol of anyone who has any inkling of resisting the American hegemony.
The Islamic Revolution revived Iran, altered the geopolitics of Asia, and changed the entire global order, and will confidently inspire revolutionaries for years to come.
All right, viewers, now to have more insight and analysis, we are joined by Mr. Zafar Bangash, who is the director of the Institute of Contemporary Islamic Thought. Mr. Bangash, welcome to the show. So, how has the Iranian Revolution resonated across the subcontinent? What were the impacts of the Iranian Revolution on the geopolitics of the South Asian region?
Well, as far as the Islamic Revolution in Iran is concerned, it came as a breath of fresh air for the vast majority of people in the subcontinent. The reason for that is that particularly people in Pakistan and Muslims in India, had always struggled for an Islamic state. And although Pakistan came into existence as a country based on the basis of Islam, but it was only after the Islamic Revolution in Iran and what the people witnessed that they found that this was a truly Islamic revolution that stood for the oppressed and the mustad'afin of the world, and that it was prepared to stand up to the imperialist powers that had terrorized the world until that time. So the Islamic Revolution in Iran was extremely well received by the overwhelming majority of people, Muslims as well as non-Muslims, because there are a lot of oppressed non-Muslims as well, particularly in India. So they looked upon this as a revolution that brought about true liberation.
Okay, so it was well received. You also mentioned Pakistan there. Can you elaborate more on that? How was the Islamic Revolution in Iran received in Pakistan specifically?
As far as the Islamic Revolution's impact on Pakistan is concerned, it was absolutely tremendous, simply because in Pakistan there are a number of Islamic political groups and movements. And if we keep in mind that after the abolition of the Khilafah that had existed in Turkey, although it was just a shell, but even before that, when there were talks that the Khilafah was going to be abolished in Turkey, there was a Khilafah movement that emerged in the subcontinent. And most of the proponents of that movement were obviously Muslims. And then once the Khilafah was abolished, we saw that in Egypt, the Ikhwanul Muslimun emerged in 1928. And then in 1941, the Jamaat-e-Islami emerged in what is today called Pakistan. So the Jamaat-e-Islami and a number of other Islamic groups and political parties have always striven for an Islamic revolution type of change. So when the Islamic Revolution in Iran occurred, they obviously saw in it the realization of their own dreams and their own aspirations. I also want to emphasize that within Pakistan, the people are quite religiously oriented. And so whenever there is any change in any society based on Islam, they immediately welcome it and support it. And so in Pakistan, the impact of the Islamic Revolution has been absolutely tremendous.
Mr. Bangash, our team has collected a few global media coverages in this regard, and I would appreciate if we could take a look at them and then we can move ahead.
In an article published by The Times on February 16, 1979, Richard Falk wrote, "In looking to the future, Ayatollah Khomeini has spoken of his hopes to show the world what a genuine Islamic government can do on behalf of its people. He has made clear frequently that he scorns what he considers to be the so-called Islamic governments in Saudi Arabia, Libya and Pakistan." Despite the turbulence, many non-religious Iranians talk of this period as Islam's finest hour. Having created a new model of popular revolution based for the most part on non-violent tactics, Iran may yet provide us with a desperately needed model of humane governance for a third world country. This article argues that Imam Khomeini was the Gandhi of Iran and examines how Americans perceived the Iranian Revolution and seeks to understand how many influential individuals failed to understand or acknowledge the true nature of the Shia opposition led by Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. The revolution opened a new chapter for political Islam in the late 20th and early 21st centuries and had a deep impact on revolutionary movements across the globe, especially those that were using the Islamic frame of reference for political activism. Iranian Revolution had led to fundamental geopolitical shifts in the Middle Eastern region. Examples: USSR invasion of Afghan, Cold War between Saudi and Iran, etc. Its repercussions are still felt throughout the region. Even the ripples of this effect have been felt on India-Iran relations.
Mr. Bangash, welcome back. Let's continue with the question answer session. How is the founding father of Iran's revolution, Imam Khomeini, revered across the subcontinent?
Well, let me quickly touch on what else I know about the Islamic Revolution, because in the last 42 years, it has faced tremendous challenges, and yet it has been able to not only withstand those challenges, but it has made tremendous progress in the defense industry, in aerospace, in nanotechnology, in all kinds of missile technology. I mean, this is something quite remarkable, that a country that is subjected to so much pressure and so much difficulties, that it is able to achieve these great strides in all of these fields. As far as the leader of the Islamic Revolution, Imam Khomeini, is concerned, I had the honor of meeting him actually in 1982. He was a tremendously inspiring personality, very humble, very simple. He lived in a very simple house. His lifestyle was extremely simple, and yet he had such an overpowering personality that he changed the course of history with his simplicity. And of course, I also noticed that the people in Iran would give their lives for him. They just looked or waited for any word from him, and they would immediately follow it. And so Imam Khomeini in the last century, I would say, was the greatest revolutionary leader that emerged. And the most remarkable part of that is that 15 years prior to the Islamic Revolution, he spent his life in exile. He was not even inside Iran. And yet, he had such a hold on the thinking of the people that he was able to motivate them and mobilize them to bring about this absolutely remarkable revolution in Iran. And I think, let's be honest, before the Islamic Revolution, certain segments of Iran's society had become very westernized. They were totally detached from Islam. And yet, once the Islamic Revolution came about and a society based on the values of Islam was established, then these people that had previously deviated from Islam also moved towards Islam, although not all of them, but a very vast majority of them. And there were tremendous changes in the lives of many, many people all over the world as a result of the Islamic Revolution in Iran and as a result of Imam Khomeini's own personality. So in that sense, the Imam, despite the fact that he's been gone for now 32 years or so, he is still very fondly remembered by people all over the world.
Some very interesting and enlightening thoughts by Mr. Zafar Bangash. Thank you so much, Mr. Zafar Bangash, for being with us on our show. It was very nice having you here. Viewers, now let's see how people on social media have reacted to the Iranian Revolution and its reception across the subcontinent.
Lubna Batul opines that Pakistan needs a spiritual leader as Imam Khomeini was for the Iranians. Abida Noorani also refers to the historical fact that Pakistan was among the first countries to recognize the Islamic Revolution in Iran. In response to the tweet by the official account of Ayatollah Khamenei about his trip to India, Mort Abbas, as an Indian, expresses his interest and considers the leader as the model for living with dignity. Monir sees the Islamic Revolution as the third way with a religious nature that was represented to the people while the world was divided by the two modern and materialist ideologies of East and West.
And that was our episode about the events that took place throughout the year across the subcontinent. To watch bits of our episodes and more updates, follow us on our social media platforms and make sure to give us feedback about what you think. We'll meet the same time, same day next week. Thanks for watching.